para clausurar oficialmente.
To officially close this 25th International Convention on Insurance, we would like to invite Alvaro Uribe Vélez, former President of Colombia and Senator for Centro Democrático.
Centro y le pido a Carlos Holmes que me corra al lado suyo.
Doctor Uribe, bienvenido.
President Uribe, welcome. The auditorium is yours. President Uribe, it is an honor for this conference to welcome you with very distinguished members of your team, Ambassador Carlos Holmes Trujillo, Ambassador Araujo, and House of Representatives Oscar Dario Perez. Although you know it, I'm going to repeat it because the country is present via the media. In the opening session of this conference, we heard from former President Cesar Gaviria, who's the leader of one of the campaigns for the yes to the plebiscite. Colombian citizens will be voting on this Sunday. In this morning's sessions, we heard an academic debate, two wonderful presentations by Sergio Clavijo and Hernando José Gómez on the economic impacts of a peace negotiated with FARC. And we just had a controversy, a very interesting controversy between the President of the Senate and Ambassador Carlos Holmes Trujillo, who have different positions on this matter. This is then the symmetrical space that we conceded to President Gaviria Trujillo for you to express before this audience your thoughts and comments, and also to the media, to the country, about the crucial decision we will be making in the voting booths on next Sunday. This is our contribution as an association to the transcendental political process the country is experiencing, and we offer it with entire symmetry and absolute neutrality. If you will, let me begin first. We will develop this conversation, so to speak, the old style, well known by former President Uribe. But I will begin with some questions, and I ask my colleagues that we have microphones available and that these be distributed or handed out for there to be an exchange of opinions. So let's talk about this, President. This dilemma, this controversy that we're in seems to have. Supposedly, there's one side that's in favor of peace and another that's in favor of war. This dilemma gives rise to another position that's very firm and radical. On the one hand, it is believed or affirmed that the negotiation is the best possible and that there's no room for touching even a comma in the agreement reached with FARC, whereas, as we heard from Mr. Carlos Holmes Trujillo, well, there's possibilities opening up for renegotiation that could have a more or less broad context, but would serve, as he has said, to reconcile Colombians with respect to this initiative. Perhaps you would like to start upon this, and then we can begin our dialogue. I would like to greet you all very respectfully. I am very pleased to be at Fase Colda. I thank the former Minister President of Fase Colda, Jorge Humberto Botero, deeply for this presentation. The peace, the war, peace or war, words should not be examined solely based on their linguistic origin, but also according to the historical context. In Latin America, much was talked about war and conflict to refer to armed insurgencies and dictatorships. And this has not been the case in Colombia. In the late 50s, early 60s, guerrilla groups began that declared themselves openly communist, that would replace the rule of law and by substituting private initiatives by socialism, by substituting the means of communication of privately by state ownership, substituting pluralism by a violent clash of classes. Nobody anticipated at that time, I was attending public university, that they could become narco-terrorists. And that evolution occurred. And in this entire process, Colombian democracy has lived in continuous perfectioning. Mexicans said, prided themselves in that they had had the less number of years, 12. In Colombia, it was only 4 years of democratic interruption. Well, in this entire process, Colombian democracy perfected itself. It afforded opportunities. Even during the so much criticized National Front, which was restrictive and transitory, the Communist Party was able to elect its representatives through the lists of the movement of President López Miquelsen. President Betancourt allowed FARC to take people to Congress. There I met Braulio Herrera and Ivan Marquez. They combined the struggles, kidnapping, crime, etc. In 1991, an opportunity was given to all. FARC rejected this opportunity. We have had, I recall, they said they would seize their arms fight. And I think the circumstances of Colombian democracy, which is a democracy that has lived in, has undergone continuous improvement without resorting to communism, we can say that we have not had what was called in Latin America war or conflict, which was the clash of these civilian insurgencies with weapons and without drug trafficking against the dictatorships. Here we have had finally a challenge by narco-terrorism to the rule of law. That is why I believe that the dilemma here is not between peace or war. I think it is a mistake to call war the security policies, to discredit them. War demands a certain legitimacy in this clash between contenders. Security is a democratic value, an obligation of the state. For this reason, I believe that here we're not in a dilemma between peace or war. And I think that the country with defects in lackings in the administration I presided was making progress in social policies, In 2010, supported those banners, they anticipated that based on these policies, the administration would have been able to get this to become a great peace, not with the extermination, as some of my critics have said. We had social policies that had allowed the reinsertion of 35,000 paramilitary, of 18,000 guerrilla, security policies that pressured on this. There was generosity without impunity, without political eligibility of large criminals, and without altering the national agenda. I think that if this had continued, the leaders of these groups would surely be in Havana or Caracas, but there would have been a demobilization of the rest. Today, it is said that 5,700 are going to demobilize. I think we would have seen a demobilization, and the leaders would have stayed without capacity to undertake criminal actions in Colombia. We missed out on this opportunity. Today, it is more difficult. So Jorge Humberto asked me about peace or war, or the best negotiation possible. FARC have said, first, that armed conflict has been reivindicated with this process. They've expressed to Mexican newspapers that the president of Colombia had recognized their victory. In the conference 2 weeks ago at Yari, they repeated their entire ideological agenda, socialism of the 21st century. They went back to their Marxist-Leninist origins and the installment of totalitarian socialism. I think that ultimately here there's been no negotiation, but rather an acceptance of all their aspirations. When I compare what has been approved to FARC in these 297 pages with what were the requests in Tlaxcala and Caravalleda, and I say, well, why wasn't this accepted at that time? We would have saved time and avoided a lot of violence. So I disagree from what has been said that this is the best negotiation possible, that it's better to have an imperfect peace agreement, an imperfect peace than a perfect war. Here, there hasn't been an imperfect war. What has existed here is an acceptance of the entire agenda of this narco-terrorist group. To continue along this scheme, Jorge Humberto, perhaps I would stop here and wait for a second question from you. There cannot be a peace agreement without a certain degree of composition or transaction with respect to the values of justice. The peace agreement establishes there will not be indult for major crimes established in the Rome Statute and in international criminal law. It establishes penalties or sentencing for those who do not confess, and it establishes privileges because those responsible of the major crimes that submit to the transitional justice early would have non-restrictive of liberty rights, and the government has said with arguments, very interesting arguments, that this is the best possible arrangement, that it is the way to reconcile the values of justice and peace. I think you do not share this point of view. Well, this matter of impunity and eligibility. Indeed, there is an article in the agreement that repeats in several of its numerals that says there will not be amnesty for crimes against humanity. We believe that the agreement is an agreement of a full amnesty. In certain cases, an open, explicit amnesty. In other cases, a disguised amnesty. What cases worry us that it's open, explicit amnesty? For instance, the assassination of soldiers and police, their kidnapping. And you say, well, the International Penal Court, in terms of confrontation, does not consider this a crime against humanity, therefore it can be amnestied. But you know what has happened in Colombia? Who's going to respond in the case of the 27 soldiers in Popayan assassinated while they were sleeping? The ambush the ambush of police assassinated in Mitú, Las Delicias, and Patascoy, and the many cases of soldiers and policemen while they have been on their days off, on vacation, being unlicensed, being forced to get off a bus, have been kidnapped, have been assassinated, and the answer of FARC has always been, it's that we're exercising, we're in conflict. Our armed forces have been democratic. They have not been the army of Videla or Pinochet or the old Central American dictatorships. When ours have failed, they have been sanctioned. That's why I feel it's very serious, it's grave, that treating them as a political act or equal to terrorism. You don't call terrorism a terrorist act, they're called political actor. The armed forces also political actors. And I think that this total amnesty is bad. It's very serious. And you wonder about drug trafficking. Indeed, under the crimes against humanity by the International Penal Court, drug trafficking doesn't appear. And it's because its statute is a collection of minimums. And this means that the signatory countries appreciate what other crimes can be incorporated into these hideous crimes or horrendous crimes. And you can include those that are included there. But you cannot add, you can add crimes. The juridical decisions have two sources, the formal and the real. In Colombia's real life, what drug trafficking has done is generate horrendous crimes or crimes against humanity. Colombia should consider this a crime against humanity. Here it's considered a political crime in the case of FARC, the largest cocaine cartel. I asked on Monday to the Mexicans here in Cartagena, would you give political eligibility to Chapo Guzman, the leaders of the Mexican cartels? Why are the leaders of FARC given these two benefits? The largest cocaine cartel in the world, larger than the cartels in Mexico. In our period, this cartel, we extradited 1,200 individuals, thinking of the new generations that they didn't have to be told they were the sons of a pariah country. Today, to consider drug trafficking by FARC as a political crime, there's no internal punishment, there's no extradition, and there's political eligibility. I think this sets a terrible precedent. Regarding other crimes the government accepts as heinous crime, just as the recruiting of children, the raping of women, 6,800 women raped, known cases, 17,000 children incorporated. And here there is and there isn't jail. In which cases is there jail? When he who from FARC appears before the court has not acknowledged during the first or the second stage that he or she committed the crime. And in the third, that the crime is proven even if it was not acknowledged. At that time, they would have 20 years of jail time. But you have to consider this. Minor and women's protection laws in Colombia require that a Colombian who murders a child or a woman has between 40 and 60 years of jail time. Here, in the worst of cases, FARC would have 20 years of jail time and always political eligibility. Let's go to the first case. They get to the court, they acknowledge the crime, they don't get jail time. So we say that's where disguised impunity starts. We have accepted for regular guerrilla not to go to jail, that a regular guerrilla be reinserted with generosity. But we are worried about the lack of sanctioning or punishment to the leaders because of the example and because of the juridical consequences this can have in the long term. The government says they have sanctions, that the sanction is their restriction restriction of inhabiting and mobility. But that's going to be inapplicable because it's going to coincide with the exercise of political representation. There's people who have to be in constant mobility. Also, international jurisprudence and national jurisprudence have said that that's a symbolic sanction. And for the cases of crimes against humanity, this symbolic sanction is not the adequate one. It's an accessory sanction after years of jail, and here there aren't years of jail. In Colombian law, this sanction has only been principle in the case of minor contraventions. And the government argues that the national margin of appreciation allows the government that substitution of the sentence. But we believe not so, because this margin of appreciation needs to look at what happens in the internal law. And in internal law, there are 140,000 inmates for less serious crimes than those of FARC. There's young men in jail because of sexual acts and abuses, because of a law in our government that made these laws harder to protect our women. So when internal government requires that sanction, how can you understand this would not be applied to FARC? And international law has said that when there isn't adequate sanctioning, there's no justice. And this has led us to say that there is a disguised impunity. But in addition, Article 36 allows political eligibility without any restriction. No restriction in terms of the subject or restriction in terms of the seriousness of the crimes. And that's where I want to go. A student at EAFIT University asked me or said to me, there isn't an international law that prohibits the election of individuals who have committed crimes. And he said to me, the International Criminal Court allows that when there is truth and repair, there be the substitution of the sentence.
In Article 77 of the International Criminal Law, it says that those crimes against humanity need a sanction of prison. They say from 27 to 60 years, and in exceptional cases, it could be of a longer term and even for life. And Article 110 of the International Criminal Law says that when there is truth and repairs, this imprisonment could be reduced but not be eliminated. The International Criminal Court is a collection of minimums, and countries cannot breach those minimums. Political eligibility does not have that international prohibition. However, in practice, in democratic countries like the US, or in South America, Belgium, France, there is a prohibition to elect criminals. None of the 140,000 prisoners who are in our jails right now in Colombia have political eligibility. What if we had allowed the paramilitary to be eligible, or Timochenko might become the president of the republic? At that time, it could have been Carlos Castaño or Salvatore Mancuso. The case of Spain is very important, Dr. Jorge Humberto, because Spain is believed to have the most flexible democratic legislation to facilitate the election of people who have been condemned. Arnaldo Ortega has just left jail. He was imprisoned because he had belonged to ETA. He submitted himself as a candidate for the presidency of the Basque country, and the High Courts of Spain said you can't because you are in a conditional freedom period, and that is the most flexible democratic country in this subject matter. Here, they might be elected and exert political representation no matter what crime they committed, and even though they might be in jail or in a restriction of freedom, we believe that that generates a bad precedent for Colombia. I've been told, well, if they didn't have the opportunity, allow me to say something, just to fulfill the wish that you asked. If anyone wants to make a question, please raise your hand so that you can get a microphone. And while that happens, I will ask you a different question, okay? From the standpoint of the yes, they say that if the no wins, it will be a national catastrophe. It will be like jumping to a vacuum. I would like to ask you, what are the main reasons of why we should vote for a no, and why that eventual success or triumph of no would not be a national catastrophe? If there's anyone who wants to ask a question, after the President answers, you may ask your question. Mr. President, we have 68 observations. We very often dialogued with the government, with Dr. De La Calle. They didn't hear any of our arguments. In occasions, I was there. Very often, we were represented by Ivan Duque or Dr. Carlos Holmes or Dr. Oscar Iván Zuluaga. The President of the Republic invited us in a letter when everything had already been done. There was no possibility to heed our arguments or to have a debate. In Congress, we proposed many options. When they reduced the threshold from 50 to 13%, we voted on a proposal of a party that said, don't reduce it to 13%. That's shameful for democracy. Leave it at least at 20, and the government did not allow it. We asked to have a question for each of the subjects in the referendum of 2003 against political clientelism and corruption that proposed the death of Congress, or the political death of corrupt, the freezing of public expenditures, save for education and health, had many questions. There were many things done from the substantive standpoint. I wouldn't know how to prioritize, Dr. Jorge Humberto. What is the greatest of our objections? There are many. I have a great discrepancy with the government in relation to the impact, the economic impact of the agreements, and I would like not to finish without referring to that. Some ask the contrary. What do you think are good about the agreement? So I usually look at the subject of the protection to the demobilized members of FARC. It's correct for them to be protected, but I find the following. The organism established to protect them will protect them with personnel who have been armed by FARC. That is how the corruption of DAS began in the past. That organism, that agency, will be able to review the CVs of public employees, to oversee the private overseeing companies, and fourth, an agency with FARC to survey those who voted no, who are called the enemies of peace. Fifth, Article 48 allows NGOs of human rights, which some are neutral and proper and some are biased, but they can accuse Colombians at that court. They could be civilians, military, policemen, and that accusation will have the same weight as an accusation made by the prosecutor's office or by justice. And in that agency, both FARC and the government commit to combat the successors of paramilitaries. It's very serious, in my opinion, for the government to partner with individuals who have been criminals to combat other criminals. That experience was quite serious in the beginning of the 90s when the state joined the Pepes to combat Pablo Escobar. From there, terrible criminals arose, like Don Berna. 9 years later, when our government took term, we almost found it impossible to imprison him or extradite them. Some people said that in 2002, the paramilitary were winning the elections. Can you imagine, Dr. Jorge Humberto, that our government had looked the other way and had allowed the paramilitary to continue advancing? They would have probably ended with FARC, and we would have done a great institutional damage to the country. That's why we decided to confront all of them. And so that leads me to look at something that I thought was good, to protect the demobilized people of FARC. This becomes, however, a great hazard, restricting the freedom of the military and of policemen. And one could say the same about the victims. In the case of the victims, they don't demand the money to pay damages to the victims. Joaquin Gomez from FARC has clearly said, and it is the FARC's position, that the the damages must be paid by the government. They do not repent. There's no expression of repentance. this does not generate a condition of reconciliation. When you generate a bad example and you reproduce violence, then you deny the right to the non-repeating of violence, and then we have this problem of money. The Attorney General said you have to declare the goods you acquired, you have to return the children, and you have to return the kidnapped, the abducted. The FARC answered very arrogantly, and what would they do when they have power? I mean, and there is some ambiguous program in the project of amnesty. You find an article that says that the action of the extinction of domain over movable or immovable goods of a real property or none remains. They don't clarify financial assets. They don't clarify about properties abroad. But Article 6 of the Amnesty Project or Bill of Law says that the benefit of amnesty will prevail over any other action. So this gives the opportunity to FARC who said they are not required to return the money. We were given that privilege. Why will we be mandated to deliver, to return the goods, the assets? In my opinion, this generates two effects. One of juridical instability and another one of we're setting a bad example. Total impunity has always given birth to new violence. What happened in Salvador 23 years ago? In Salvador, there was a meeting that was similar to the one that was held in Cartagena last Monday. The world celebrated the agreement. The circumstances were different. There was a civil insurgency that had no narco traffic or no drug dealing, and there was a country that had between dictatorships and quasi-democracies. They were at that time in a military tie. The agreement was sealed with a law of total amnesty. The guerrilla took 16 years to attain power. The economy was tied through agreements similar to the ones that are being agreed here. The country got depressed and despaired. They elected the guerrilla 16 years ago. They're on their second term. The economy is paralyzed. There is a lack of trust to invest. They've lived off from resources of Venezuela or from $4,000 or $5,000 million of remittances from the families who live abroad to their family members living in Salvador. What happened in relation to El Salvador at the International Criminal Court? They just declared that the law that approved the agreement in 2003 was not legal. So these agreements generate legal instability. Who was going to anticipate in Salvador in 2003 that that could happen? In that case, the criminals would have gone to jail. Why is it better to say yes or no? No, if yes wins, the two mechanisms will be activated. The president, because of extraordinary faculties, will be able to enact as a law everything agreed to with FARC in relation to the legal actions. The Special Legislation Act that allows to raise the 297 pages to the Constitution will be allowed. And I must sincerely say that I never thought that the Colombian Constitution could be substituted by an agreement between a government and a group of terrorists. And I did not think that the government could do that. If the C or the yes wins, those circumstances will take place. Then in 2018, there's a new government. He finds that they will find that the country cannot be governed, and there will be two possibilities. Someone said, I will vote yes, even though I have certain doubts. I will then confront with FARC in 2018. That person wins the elections, then FARC will say that they won by losing because everything was on their favor in the Constitution, and the person say, well, the government or the country cannot be governed. Let's take some corrective actions. And they'll say, well, how will you do that if this was part of the Constitution? Allow me to put this into brackets. I hope that the Constitutional Court would say that including disagreements in the Constitution would not locate them as part of the Constitution. But if you voted yes, what has Carlos Holmes said, or Iván Duque, or Oscar Iván, or our candidates said. If Yes won, and if they arrived to the presidency, they would tell FARC, look, you have all of the guarantees in order to attain peace, to have protection, but we have to do certain revisions and reforms in order to guarantee the solidity of democracy, to take away the risks. If the no wins, the first thing you'd have to ask yourself is, Dr. Jorge Humberto, why did we have to choose a no? Carlos Holmes was party to abstaining, but that a democratic guarantee is not efficient because it's not competitive. How can abstention compete against 4,400,000 votes for a yes? So the blank vote was also suppressed. When we said we're going to vote no, they said, oh, of course, Uribe is a paramilitary, he loves war and so forth. Please don't confuse war with security. Remember that paramilitarism was dismounted. Feel at ease. What we want is for a reorientation of the agreements. They told us you can't do that. The presidential authority derived from the Constitution and the law to negotiate or renegotiate continues to be intact. The no does not affect it. FARC has said that they would not accept any renegotiation, but they have also said that they will not go back into violence, into war in their terms. It would be foolish if they'd accept a renegotiation today after they were given everything. The no would be a clear signal that Colombians want peace. I have said quite solidarily to the country that we of the no also want peace, but that we disagree with the text of the Havana Agreement. So if the no wins, it's possible, there's a clear signal that things must be corrected. The government of FARC don't want a proposal. A proposal of no is give FARC guarantees. Let them concentrate. I mean, we do have certain objections to the concentration sites as our escape exits, places where narco dealers domain. And the Senate had approved a law demanding that for FARC to stop every crime because they have not suspended either narco dealing or extortion, and the government didn't want to review the negotiation. So there's no other way but looking for a government in 2018 that would start that very difficult task, Dr. Jorge Humberto. And also, another problem has to be resolved. One of the armed forces, they are demotivated countrywide. Extortion is increasing. And you ask the citizens, why don't you report? And they say, well, why should we report if there's no security policy? We've said, let's not wait for the transitional justice to judge the armed forces. There is a bill of law at the Senate presented by my companions of the Centro Democrático to give certain relief to the military forces without impunity, because that would be like returning a motivation. And is there anyone else who wants to ask? I wanted to tell this person something. The world has identified the problem in a wrong manner. They've identified it as a problem from the Central Americans or from the Southern Cone. Allow me to ask, is the democracy of Colombia the one to blame for poverty, or is the Colombian democracy the one to blame for poverty? And I've answered no. The different countries showed a reduction of absolute poverty and of misery. What happened with the growth of democracy? Those reductions were frozen. I think that it's very important to look at what has happened to the history, both political and economic history of the country. This city is an example. Colombia has not had a social problem because of the private companies, but because of a lack of the private companies. In the cities where there is industry, like in Mamonal, in the touristic zone, every time a new industry is established or expanded, every time a hotel is built, there is more social security. The subject of absolute poverty is at a place where private companies have not been able to arrive. So to tell the world that we're under a war that is due to private companies or to democracy has created a very unfair image of Colombia. The world does not know all of the opportunities that the groups have had. When the M19 was reintegrated, or Quintilame or EPL, Dr. De La Calle said that peace in Colombia was sealed, that from there onwards, no policy with weapons would be accepted, that would be terrorism. And he pointed at FARC. 25 years later, he says that what FARC has done is politics with weapons. What will they tell us in 20 years with BACRIM or with the dissident members of FARC or ELN? That is why that image of 56 years of war, of a restricted democracy, of private companies' war and fair, is an image that does not correspond to the reality of the country and which has done a lot of damage to Colombia. None of the government had accepted that thesis, save the one of President Santos, that we lived under a civil war that began in 1965 in Marquetalia. That is a very new position. I think that is quite unfair with the country. Is there anyone else in the auditorium who wants to speak? The person with the black shirt? To identify yourself, Dr. Uribe, I represent the network of university radios for broadcasting in the country. I move throughout the country. I talk with many young people. I must confess that right now I am not sure whether I'll vote for a yes or no. This is a product of a lack of information that exists in the network, in the media. So it's like sending a message to the young people who are listening to us. Why should we vote for a yes or why should we vote for a no? How can we prevent that a country with an elastic morale that accommodates to whatever is convenient? We already listened to ex-President Gaviria. Now we listen to you, and perhaps if you listen to someone like me, what would you tell the young people? I would tell this to the young people. I have had many discussions with youngsters at universities in these campaigns. I have tried to use arguments. Last week, I was almost killed in Ibagué. I told them, please, you guys, don't kill me. You know that I'm coming into the auditorium. And when I came in, they began to throw objects at me. And I said, why don't you throw arguments? And when they insulted me, I said, well, why don't you do it quickly so we can go into the arguments? And I've told them my political career is long. It generates controversy. The governments I presided probably did commit mistakes. There were things that were lacking, but the country was progressing. And that is why they elected this president in 2010. The word peace is captivating. And for young people, they tell us our generation wants a different country, and I've told them peace is something that creates an illusion, but the texts are not very encouraging. They're deceptive. Young people need freedom, need education, and they need a country with the trust from the investors. The chapter I referred to have the beginning of the guarantees of FARC ending by restrictions and authorities that are exorbitant, which I call political police, is the prelude of a restriction of freedom. Totalitarism from the socialists proposed it. It's part of their ideology. The political subject for me is extremely concerning because, or worrisome. You have looked at the economic indicators of the country. They're not going well. And they've told us it's because of oil. Argentina, Chile, this year show, notwithstanding the low price of oil, a great level of drilling. We should be drilling 130 or 180 wells per year. Incentives are not only taken away. Those areas were occupied by by drug dealing and by FARC. The problem is not the price of oil. To have reserves for 5 years or for 6 million of homes connected to gas, to have reserves of gas for 6 years. That is not the problem. The problem is we're not doing exploration. And if you add to that the consolidated taxation, mentioned the elimination of the rule. Minister Botero, you went after the law that allowed the tax stability laws. I think that when you eliminated the road to tax stability, damaged the country. What does the agreement say? We need more taxes. They talk about a higher land tax. Look at what has happened in the rural land tax. The country is sold, the fields don't pay taxes. The land tax in the rural area was 30 billion in 2002. Today it's 140. They have increased it substantially. Dr. De La Calle says that the subject of expropriations and of the farm reserve zones will remain as it is set forth in the Constitution. That's not true. The reserve zones for farmers are discretionary. For the government here, they would be mandatory. Why don't we have an agro-industrial policy in those areas of farm reservation law? Because those properties would be subtracted because of the subject of expropriation. The subject of expropriation because of social utility and environmental issues is attached to the FARC agreement, and there's a literal in page 11 where it places the honest people in the rural areas at the same risk of expropriation as others. You can't imagine the difficulties in the Monte de Maria with the law of land. That has led to a war with machetes between farmers. The whole national property legitimacy has been put at risk. The only lands that are not at risk are those that urban or rural delivered by the Spanish crown. So I say that there's a lack of motivation that could occur in the fields. Chavez and Castro began in the fields. The urban societies were not really interested in them. The only thing they achieved was hunger. Venezuela had not only been rich in oil, in iron ore, in gas, they were wealthy in corn, in beans, in dairy products. They were the first country in the production of the caraota beans, and now what they don't import, they can't buy. The country expropriated 7 million hectares and they have to import 80% of the food. And they passed a law about the industry and they ended with the economy. I'm seeing whatever is in the future with great concern. I believe that the agreement destimulates investment and creates doubt. It will not produce the 7 or 8 million required to meet FARC's requirements. That's why I tell the young people the following. There are risks to restrict freedom. There are risks to affect investment. The needs of education, of universal education in the country of high quality could be put at risk if it's relevant for entrepreneurship. Even if we have youngsters who are well educated in a country that has no investment confidence, it expels them. It sends them abroad to look for opportunities. When I look at those two chapters, I believe that the text of the agreement is not good for the youngsters, even though it has this captivating word peace.
President, Senator Araújo is telling me you have an appointment for live TV shortly. Well, this is more important. Well, whatever you say. Because how can I not be thankful to Jorge Botero, who's the only one who dares invite me? You don't know with what enthusiasm I came over here. A lot has been said about savings in military expenses, and that's another economic consequence. I don't believe if you disaggregate the military expenses, you'll see that military expenses has a very large component of pensions, on social security, in health, in the area of health, etc. And the country today needs, let's say you can save on a number of soldiers, but the country needs almost to double the number of police. Salaries of police is very low. My administration was unable to level the salaries of the members of the armed forces. We need to take care of 900,000 kilometers of sea, 600,000 kilometers of jungle. What are we going to do to address or to face the 600,000 hectares, 67,000 hectares of drugs? Our rivers are very long. 17,000 kilometers of rivers, and under the Army's watch, we have 15,000. What about the rest? How about having the Navy, a military Air Force who works with the commercial Air Force and the civil Air Force and that are in the investigation? I don't think the country has been told the truth when we talk about large savings in military expenses to be transferred to the social. Perhaps one last question we can take. There's over here, President Uribe. It is not a question, it is an appreciation, a thanks. I am the daughter of Eliseo Restrepo, who died a year ago. He was in agriculture his entire life, always advocating for the rural area. He grew oil palm, rice, bananas. He did everything he could. He was president of the SAC. We have always been very grateful to you because you returned the country to us. And I cannot stop saying this publicly. I was confused with peace a week before my father died. The both of us were confused. And we held a hope, or we hoped that things could be done this way. But your presentation has been very strong and very accurate, and I thank you for it. It is a very judicious work that has been done with very accurate figures, and we need to be conscious and the responsibility it deserves and that you deserve from us. Well, thank you very much to you. For your father, I have nothing but great memories and gratitude. He surrounded me with the trust. I truly admired him. He was part of that group of very intelligent, hardworking people, and I'm deeply thankful. I saw somebody else, and let me say something about the pillo, or the criminal, and the pillo, the hardworking. My name is Roberto Peralta, Mexican German. I think that by just saying that, you know what I'm going to ask. Before this, a very quick comment. I arrived in your country on Monday, and the truth is that I was overwhelmed by Colombians, the humility and the gratitude and the smiles of arriving at such an important moment for you. Talking a bit about everything that you're experiencing, you have a commitment in which you are not alone. I don't know, coming from Mexico, it would seem ironic that having such a large territory, we have to look to you as our older brother to tell us or show us first how to do it in this where we are in diapers and where we're merely starting for so many years. My specific question would be, would you do something different after this Sunday? What would one do, or what would you do, and what would you tell Central America? But it is not only Mexico. The problem we're going to have in Mexico is because we are so large, the loss of blood is going to be more exponential. The suffering will be more exponential, what we're suffering now. Thus far, we have 25,000 people disappeared in Mexico. But in addition, what can we learn to put an end to this journey or this road down which we're going at such a fast speed? We, on a timely manner, gave to Presidents Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón, and Peña Nieto information about Colombia that will be very helpful. The extension of property and the asset laundering law, of which Jorge Humberto Butero has been a strong advocate. This was also very helpful to Colombia. We also shared with them the forest keeping families program. To prevent these illegal crops, we engage 1,000 peasant families that committed to eradicate the crops and care for the forest, and they were paid for this. Unfortunately, this program has been dismantled. I would say that Mexico would not give impunity and eligibility to Chapo Guzman or the leaders of the Mexican cartels. FARC is the largest cocaine cartel in the world and the largest provider of the Mexican cartels. We believe it is very serious that they receive impunity and eligibility. But I wanted to add this. I'm told, well, but you attempted peace many times. Yes, on 26 times we allowed initiatives to reach humanitarian agreements. We allowed initiatives for peace. We established certain conditions. We called them the unmovables. I think that democracies need a big balance between peace without impunity, justice without vengeance, peace without deterioration of a private enterprise. For me, these are the red lines. I must confess from the bottom of my heart, I wouldn't have been able to sign this agreement. But many say, oh, in the international community, because he's full of hatred. FARC killed his father. When FARC killed my dad in 1983, a few months later, President Betancourt appointed me president of the Peace Commission in Antioquia, and I accepted. We received 18,000 guerrillas in our administration without negotiating the national agenda. Now they're going to receive 5,700, and they've been given the national agenda. I feel that's very sensitive. If we had been moved by hatred and revenge, we wouldn't have protected those guerrillas. We wouldn't have been in that peace commission. We wouldn't have made all the attempts we made. But we are truly concerned about liberty, private initiative, democratic values, and the danger of totalitarian socialism. 5 weeks ago in La Guajira, I had a dialogue with a lady who told me that her son was recruited by FARC, forced to give her body to the leaders. She was raped, made pregnant, and forced to abort. She returned home, and she said, Mom, are they being punished? They're not being punished. They can be elected. Mom, are they regretful? They're not expressing any regret. On the contrary, they laugh, they mock. In fact, there's a semantic argument about what happened here with Timochenko. For the first time, they talked about pardon, but some sharp Colombians have said that offering pardon is saying, I pardon what you did to me. So he's telling Colombian society that he forgives what he did to FARC. I have passed over that semantic exercise. I've said they have talked about pardon, but justifying the crimes. Romaña told my fellow citizens in El Llano and Bogota that yes, they had suffered a lot with kidnapping, but that he had to do it. When there is pardon, justifying the crime and without regret, this pardon is just like a social compliment. It is not seriously meant and does not generate opportunities for reconciliation. A few days ago, I was writing about this matter, that being a criminal pays. And this caused a great reaction by a sector of young people. And I said to them, listen, guys, if you're good students, if you study hard, rewarding you sets a good example. But if somebody who kidnaps and assassinates, who's a criminal, is rewarded, that gives a bad example. And if in addition to not punishing them, they're rewarded, the bad example is worse. Many say, well, yes, if the yes wins, it's Uribe's defeat. I have told them, Listen, I'm not the boss of the no or the head of the no. There are Colombians who think differently from me that are in favor of no. People, the intellectual and moral solvency like Jaime Castro, Jose Gregorio Hernandez, intellectuals that are close to me, Carlos Holmes, or the young people like Fernando Nicolás, Oscar Darío, Mr. Ivan Duque, a promise of the new Colombian generations. And I have said, don't worry about me. I am 64 years old. I have lived 128. I'm a survivor of 17 attempts in my life. My hair is all white. Like they say in rural Colombia, ripe plantain does not return to green. So I have no concerns personally. I'm concerned about the future of my nation. I had to combat Chavez when he was at his peak, when he had the charisma of his checkbook. And I remember on December 17, 2003, to him, he asked me in Santa Marta, what do you think about my social policy? Because he was a nice Caribbean person. He could hide very well that hatred that he learned from Castro, Fidel, as he called him. And I said, President, I think they're good, your social policies. This about the missions makes sense. Such a rich nation as Venezuela cannot take too long in overcoming poverty. And President, he said, don't affect the private sector. You need a mutual dependency between social policies.
And he said, Uribe, you don't need that. Fidel in the 80s said that they required a socialism with oil, and he pointed at Venezuela, and I told him, Hugo, it's not enough. I visited Venezuela in June of 1998. I had left the governor's office of Antioquia, and I was at Oxford, and I was sent to a meeting of the UNDP. Everyone wanted to elect Chavez. You know what was the difference? The politicians today find it very difficult to lie because Google corrects us. If you look at the newspapers of Venezuela of that time, you will find that he always had an expropriatory nature, but he hid it. And I thank FARC because at least they have declared that their agenda is Marxism-Leninism, that the economy that they've called the socialism of the 21st century, but what I call the totalitarian socialism. Thank you, all of you. Thank you very much. And we will continue working for Colombia.
Data Crédito Experian ofrece soluciones especializadas para aseguradoras. Solución para calificación de intermediarios. Permite a las aseguradoras calificar el comportamiento crediticio y comercial de sus intermediarios a través de información relevante y veraz y dando cumplimiento con la circular número 050. Solución para suscripción riesgo personas. Aporta la información de comportamiento crediticio como variable relevante en el proceso de fijación de precios. Solución Sarlaft. Agiliza el proceso de captura y actualización de datos, dando cumplimiento a la normatividad de conocimiento de clientes. Solución Suscripción Cumplimiento. Permite agilizar la suscripción de las pólizas de cumplimiento a partir de la información que suministra sobre riesgo crediticio y comportamiento comercial. Solución Segmentación. Incorpora variables de estilo de vida y nivel de endeudamiento para el diseño de campañas más focalizadas y efectivas. Solución Identificación de fraude. Genera alertas al momento de la suscripción basadas en los hallazgos de la información.